Hey, I'm standing for this video because I feel like being stood. I feel like I have a lot more mobility. Also, how cool and fun would it be if I had like a little like a whiteboard back here or something? That would be tight. Anyway, as a channel dedicated to history and archaeology and the like, I've talked quite a bit about religion and mythology. I've covered ancient Egyptian mythology, Greek mythology, hell, we've even touched on the Bible. And I think that's really fascinating. I love learning about how religion has manifested itself throughout different civilizations. It's also a super chill thing to talk about and something people don't really get to like fussed over, so I'm going to talk about it more. Now religion is seen as more of a set of values and an identity rather than the norm or more of a way of life. And that's a relatively new way to see religion, as in past cultures, religion is typically something that the entire society is structured around, and now we have a lot more secularity. And in the Western world, that is very unique to this time period. So I thought we'd do a little bit of a history on atheism, how it began, how it started, how it's come to mean what it means today. There is no culture in recorded human history which has not practiced some form of religion. And in the ancient world, religion wasn't just an aspect of life, it was life. The two were like intermingled, intermixed, inexorably. One just couldn't exist without the other. And every faction of life was decided upon and undertaken with the knowledge that it would be judged by the gods. Despite this, we do actually see some evidence for a kind of proto-atheism take place within the ancient Western world. In ancient Greece and Rome, theism was the fundamental belief that supported the legitimacy of the state. So if you didn't believe in a god that was upholding this state, essentially you were anti-government and you could be accused of atheism, which was viewed as a capital crime, a crime against humanity itself. How could you not believe in God? More so, how could you not believe in me, your head of state? Any subversion of this state-sanctioned religion charged one of atheism and heresy and could be used to eliminate them if they were a potential political rival. But calling someone from ancient Greece or ancient Rome an atheist didn't have the connotations that it does today. You know, we think of an atheist as someone who does not believe in a god or a higher power. I mean, early Christians used to be accused of atheism because they didn't believe in the Roman pantheon. During the Roman Empire, Christians were executed for not believing in the Greco-Roman gods. An important figure in ancient Greek atheism was Epicurus. This guy was kind of ahead of his time. He gave rise to the idea that the Greek gods were merely mythologized beings. He saw the universe as this great machine of atoms, which the gods were completely irrelevant to. And he wanted to prove that humans had nothing to fear regarding death, because it was just the process of one atomic form transforming into another. How did he even think of that? That would never have crossed my mind, and I am aware of science. Now, it's important to note that Epicurus still believed the gods existed. He just said they were completely uninterested in human affairs, and people shouldn't be so caught up on trying to please them and sacrifice to them, because they just didn't give a shit. He believed the universe was governed by the force of chance without the need for divine intervention. Epicureanism was expressed perhaps most eloquently in the poem On the Nature of Things by Lucretius in the 1st century BC, in which he held that the gods do exist, but that they were just irrelevant, and that the fear of their wrath was one of the chief causes of human unhappiness. This is reiterated in a fragment of the play Sisyphus by Euripides, in which he claims that a clever man invented the fear of the gods in order to frighten people into behaving morally. Another win for Euripides. Man has never made a bad point. Atheism evolves differently all over the world, and we can see this in ancient China. China was built off of Confucianism, Taoism, legalism, and none of these really rely heavily on religious ideology. Confucianism places immense emphasis on humanistic and worldly relations, as opposed to theology and spirituality. There are no Confucian gods, and Confucius himself is worshipped as a spirit rather than a deity. The core tenet and overarching belief of the system is the importance of having a good moral character, which is an intrinsic and personal experience unrelated to the will of any god. The dominance of Confucianism and its like allowed for China to develop a cultural tendency that made acceptance of modern forms of irreligion like humanism, secularism, and atheism a possibility for most of its history. Since its antiquity, China has held its reputation for being a country devoted to ideologies, very separate from religion. Scholar Hu Shi stated in the 1920s, China is a country without religion, and the Chinese are a people who are not bound by religious superstitions. But this idea of atheism, as it becomes the word that we know it as today, really evolves and becomes much more well-defined in modern history. In the Western world, both the Renaissance and the Age of Enlightenment were a little bit fundamental in defining atheism. During the Renaissance, the criticism of the religious establishment became a thing that you could do. You could criticize the religious establishment, and if you're lucky, you would live to tell the tale. Throughout Europe, the dogma of religious institutions sort of began to lift, and this is where we get to see something called old atheism. This is a form of atheism which basically denounces the gods of one specific culture or society, but this can't be expressed for fear of the danger that admitting atheism would put them in. Atheist as a label became a smear word. It was something you could attach to those whose ideologies you opposed. Por ejemplo, that many Protestants in the 15th and 16th centuries claimed that the Pope was the arch-atheist, simply because their versions of theism differed. And if the Pope is an atheist, then do any of us really stand a chance? English playwright and poet Christopher Marlowe is said to be one of Europe's first modern atheists. This title imbued him with the dangerous implication of being an enemy of both God and the state. Not bad? He was closely related with the School of Night, which is a modern name given to a group of men centered on Sir Walter Raleigh. These guys were a group of dudes who just studied science, philosophy, and religion, and were all suspected of atheism. Mr. Marlowe, who was a part of this group, wrote a play called Dr. Faustus. And this play really grapples with these ideas of atheism, disillusionment in God and the church. The protagonist of this play, Dr. Faustus, denounces God, blasphemizes the Trinity and the Christian doctrine, and sells his soul to the devil to gain superhuman powers and live a life full of sin and indulgence. So pretty cool guy. And this is especially relevant because he's said to be the embodiment of Christopher Marlowe himself. He kind of pulled a little bit of a baby reindeer there. Anyway, this school of thought, i.e. philosophy and science and the like, was getting really, really popular around the 1770s, and being accused of being an atheist wasn't really something you had to deny anymore. Unrest in Europe at this time and the slowly dwindling faith in God led to the development of the cult of reason in France. Shit, fuck. This was short-lived, but truly magnificent. This was around between 1792 to 1794, and essentially a whole bunch of Parisian churches were transformed into temples of reason, temples that worshipped science and rationality and the human spirit, and obviously atheism. You don't really worship atheism, but it was like a core belief, I guess. As France's first established state-sponsored atheistic religion, its goal was to distance itself as much as possible from the Roman Catholic Church. France's Christian calendar was abolished. Monasteries, convents, and church properties were seized, and monks and nuns were expelled. They basically were like, we're not going to be Catholic anymore. We're going to worship science, and put man at the center of worship as opposed to some divine being. Maximilien Robespierre, the very same, made a rival cult, the cult of the supreme being, which was also a way to de-Christianize France, but was in opposition to the cult of reason. Bro just had to put his name out there, I guess. Anyways, all this is happening. Europe is going crazy. God is freaking out. People are de-Catholicizing. There's general unrest, belief in humans and reason and logic and science. And what comes next? Guys, you're not even ready. 1859, Charles Darwin publishes On the Origin of Species. Oh. Breaking records, debuted #1 on the Hot 100. He's making history. The idea that humans evolved progressively and were not these divine beings made in the image of God, even more blasphemous that they evolved from the animalistic ape, was potentially the most controversial thing that he could have said at the time. Charles Darwin publishing the ideas of natural selection and evolution is an extraordinary monument in the history of atheism. Now, obviously, as we can see, in Europe before this publication, people are starting to have doubts about faith, God, religion, the church. But that was just like an innate feeling that they had. They had nothing to back that up, really. How are you going to prove that there is no God? There's a whole thing in philosophy for the entirety of the Enlightenment. There is no God. How the fuck are we here then? I don't know. All right, well, then there's a God. That was the whole thing. You just had to deal with that. But now, evolution. So the years following Darwin's controversial little publication were crucial in developing new atheism. Basically old atheism, but with proof. The theory of evolution pitted science and religion against each other. The church famously taught that God created the earth and everything on it, while Charles Darwin's theory of evolution entirely contradicted this and basically said that the world is ever growing and ever changing. It's complex and dynamic and can exist without a divine creator. In the 19th century, believing in evolution and Charles Darwin's theory was seen as the exact opposition of being in the church, being religious, believing in God. Prior to the widespread knowledge of evolution, there was no way for an atheist to explain the existence of the cosmos or intelligent life without having to credit it to a divine creator. Where new atheism mostly differs from old atheism is in its use of scientific and evolutionary theory as intellectual leverage against the idea of belief in a God. It is the new atheist that sees all the questions asked about the universe answered by science as opposed to religion. Although there were the general beginnings of disbelief and disillusionment in God by the time that Charles Darwin published his theory, it was not like he published On the Origin of Species and people were like, oh, evolution and God isn't real. I mean, that's still not obviously. But, by the late 19th and definitely into the 20th century, it becomes a little bit difficult to ignore, especially as science continued to develop the fact that evolution is real. So in a way, atheism has been a part of our culture for as long as religion has. It's just taken various different forms and has meant very different things throughout antiquity and into modern history. And just as religion was used as a political tool, so too is atheism. I just love the idea that back in the day in the Roman Empire, you could just say that your political opponent was an atheist and then just get him completely like out of there. That's so good. It would seem to be the case that similarly to how humans have evolved through time, so too has our language and our understanding of both God and atheism and the words we use to describe those. Anyways, that's all from me. Thoughts? No, I disagree. Okay, bye.